Game week is upon us. Alabama is in California practicing. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back into Locked On Bama. Luke Robinson, that's me. Jimmy Stein, that's him. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. We appreciate you guys so much. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and I'll talk about FanDuel here in just a little bit. Jimmy, Alabama is already out in California. They are practicing in California because they play a game in California next Monday night against the Michigan Wolverines. Give us what you got so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting to me. I hope you guys are also interested in the itinerary. It's kind of crazy to me, and I know some of this is the miracle of flight and the miracle of time zone differences, but isn't it crazy that you can leave Tuscaloosa at 11 a.m. football team? That's when they flew out of Tuscaloosa on their Delta charter flight. They fly out at 11, and then they practice at 2 o'clock California time. So in other words, literally, it seems like just 3 hours later, they're practicing, obviously with the time difference, that's 2 hours. But really what happened is they flew out at 11, they landed, and I believe bussed straight from the airport to the practice field where they practiced for the first time. They are practicing, for those that would like to know. I'm not familiar with Major League Soccer, but it's apparently where the LA Galaxy, which is the Los Angeles soccer team, the pro soccer team, it's their practice facility and their practice fields. So they have 3 full-length football practice fields. And, of course, they want to practice on real grass because that's the Rose Bowl has grass. So, the main thing is you want to practice on similar grass, and I'm sure that drove, to where they would want to practice. But they're practicing, as Luke and I record this on Monday afternoon, they're practicing right now. Boy, they got all sorts of fun things planned. Tomorrow, when we do the show, Luke, I believe the team will be at Disneyland because this is a bowl game. It's not just the semifinal, right? So they're doing normal things in a bowl week. So there's a lot of entertainment lined up for the kids, and Disneyland is one of the things they're doing. Interestingly, for all of you guys that hang on every word, and I know Luke and I do, starting tomorrow, and I say tomorrow meaning Wednesday, there will be a media availability every single day from here on through the game, meaning that several Alabama players, several coaches will be in front of the media. Saturday's the big media day. That's where the media as a whole will have access to the entire Alabama football team. And I'm expecting that a lot of that will be televised on either ESPNU or SEC Network. It'll certainly be streamed online, and we'll let you know where.
If you could ask one question of anybody on the Alabama team, what would it be?
Who would you not want your daughter to date? No,
That's
I'm kidding. That was just done. For those who haven't seen it, feel free to Google. It was on Terrion Arnold's TikTok. For those who haven't seen it, pretty entertaining. No, if I could ask one question at the media availability, I would say this: not giving away anything game plan wise. When you watch Michigan, does Michigan remind you of anyone that you already played this season in the SEC stylistically? So I just think that's interesting, just in terms of game plan, what we can expect in terms of. I think the most fascinating question to me, Luke, and this may bore some people, but I'm fascinated with it. Will Alabama primarily line up in nickel against Michigan? Now, Alabama primarily lined up in nickel in all 13 games they played prior. So that's why it would be such a dramatic difference, because nickel is the primary personnel package that Alabama uses. And the vast majority, I would say maybe as many, Luke, as 80% of all snaps. I think Alabama might be in base or regular in this game, and Alabama hasn't played much of that at all, and that's kind of interesting, because it's like, whoa, you hadn't done much of that. Now you might have to do it, and the whole season's on the line. So I think that's fascinating, and Alabama players aren't going to answer that question. That's why I would phrase it differently and say, who does this remind you of? and they might give something away there, reading between the lines.
Yeah, I think that's interesting what you bring up about potentially the lining up in nickel because I mean, when we think about Michigan, I mean, when I think about Michigan, at least, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I've watched every single game. Frankly, they've had a pretty terrible schedule. I mean, it hadn't been a lot of fun to watch. And then a few of the games that I wanted to watch, like Alabama, like the Ohio State, Michigan, I was getting so nervous about Alabama, Auburn that I wasn't paying as much attention as I should. And then Iowa, Michigan, I was at the SEC championship game, so I didn't get to see it. But when I think about Michigan, the thing that jumps out to me is the fact that that when they played Penn State, they didn't throw a pass in the second half. That's what jumps out to me. And I know that J.J. McCarthy later or the previous week prior to that had like 335 yards against Purdue. But overall, I look at this team and go, since Penn State, these are McCarthy's numbers. Penn State, he had 60 yards passing. At Maryland, 141. Ohio State, 148. And then Iowa, 147. He's had one TD passing in that time. I mean, that's what I think about. So my point is, I wonder if we would line up in something a little different because I guess nickel's fine for it, but, you're certainly not going to line up in dime. I think maybe you would just focus on the run a little more. I mean, what do you think? I mean, because again, I haven't looked at them and maybe some of their games are deceptive for whatever reason, kind of like the 92 Bama team there were some moments that offense had some bad moments, and that defense was fantastic, but that offense wasn't totally inept.
Right.
It still had Sherwin-Williams and it still had Derek Lassick. I mean, it had some playmakers on the team. I guess I'm just thinking about it like when I think about Michigan, I think we got to gear up to stop the run, but maybe I'm overthinking that.
No, I think particularly with the numbers you just went over, Luke, I think stopping the run is first and foremost. I mean, that's number one. You force them to throw the ball. Now, that being said, keep this in mind. To start the season, and we'll talk about that just a little later in the show, to start the season, Michigan threw it around quite a bit, and J.J. McCarthy was extremely efficient. Now, they were playing nothing but outmanned opponents in those games, but J.J. McCarthy, like 5 games into the season, was practically throwing as many touchdown passes as he was incompletions. I mean, he was remarkably efficient through 5 games and didn't throw for a ton of yards, but was throwing for well into the 200s, a couple games in the 300s. So, McCarthy definitely turned into a different player later. Offensively, they turn into a different team later with their almost utter dependence on the run game. So that's interesting. But in terms of nickel regular, everyone needs to remember that, the defense doesn't dictate to the offense. It's the other way around. And if they come out in 4 wides with 4 wide receivers, then Alabama's going to have to match that and be in dime. The thing is, they just don't generally line up like that. They generally line up with 12 personnel, which is very similar to what Alabama does. 12 personnel, meaning 1 back, 2 tight ends. Alabama's in that all the time. And that's normally what Michigan's in.
Jimmy, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about Michigan's season on the whole. I want to just talk about something interesting I noticed on the running statistics for both teams too. Of course, before I get into all that, I need to tell everybody about FanDuel. FanDuel is so much fun. You guys are going to love it. Go check them out because as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers they're going to stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. It's that simple. If you had the Baltimore Ravens last night, boom, $150 bonus bucks. All you have to do is bet $5. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. A Jimmy could use it. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads and player props and over-unders and much, much, much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, all one word, LOCKEDON, and get involved in the NFL season or the college bowl season. It's going on like literally right now. Go check out FanDuel.com/locked-on and thank me later. All right, Jimmy. You did a deep dive on Michigan's season on 3, and that's kind of fun to go back and look. I mean, it probably wasn't as much fun as you think because Michigan played a bunch of dented soup cans at the very beginning. So, but here's something I just noticed about the rushing statistics. Okay, of course, Michigan's leading rusher is Blake Corum. He's got just over 1,000 yards. He's got 1,028 yards. And Alabama's leading rusher is Jason McClellan, who's missed some time here recently, and he's only got 803 yards, right? Well, the longest I'm going to throw out Ty Simpson's 78-yard run. I'm going to throw it out. I probably shouldn't, but I am because we know that came late in the game against Chattanooga, garbage time, not going to matter as much. The longest run for either team, let me put it this way, the longest run for each team respectively, for Michigan is 54 yards, for Alabama is 53 yards. That seems very odd considering, number one, Alabama's got a thoroughbred running quarterback. Now, he doesn't run it as much as a lot of us want him to, I understand. But we've got a running quarterback who's arguably the fastest player on the team. He's one of the top 5. And it's weird for Michigan because they played those aforementioned dented soup cans. You would think somebody would have broke free. And so it's funny. Neither team seems all too terribly explosive in the running game. And I know that Jalen Milroe I think he's got a 53-yarder. That's his long. And for Michigan, it's a 54-yarder. It just seemed a little bizarre to me.
Yeah, super bizarre, really. I mean, crazy when you consider how talented Blake Corum, even Donovan Edwards, their number 2 back, and Alabama with Jason Roydell and Jam Miller. And you got to be kidding, those are the longest runs. But I know it's true. And off the top of my head, when you said longest run for Alabama, 53 yards, if you take out the long tie run against Chattanooga, I believe that run is Milroe against Mississippi State.
It is.
And the 54-yard run might be J.J. McCarthy from Michigan against maybe Nebraska. He had a long touchdown run, I believe, against Nebraska. It might not have been 53.
It was Blake Corum. It was Blake Corum.
Okay. Well, Blake's a good player. No doubt he's a good player. But what I've noticed through my study of the first 5 games of the year for Michigan, even though they were playing, very outmanned teams, Blake Corum and the Michigan run game will sort of 5 and 6 yard you to death. They're very good at moving the chains and keeping a drive alive and burning clock, but they don't rip off chunk runs. They don't hit home runs. Corum and Edwards and McCarthy, he uses his legs. Let me tell you, he's not just, don't call him just, hey, he's pretty athletic for a thrower. J.J. McCarthy will hurt you with his legs. He's a legitimate, really good Tyler Watts plus with his legs. So McCarthy's dangerous, but a few of my takeaways from watching them early in the season is initially, I think they were a little better in the pass game than the run game. Again, they weren't hitting home runs. There weren't long runs. The running stats weren't going to blow you away. Corum was just very likely to have an 80-yard game, not a 100-yard game, but an 80-yard game. And I'm talking against UNLV, Bowling Green, East Carolina, Rutgers. He's kind of an 80-yard a game back. Sounds a lot like Jace, doesn't it? And wouldn't Jace have 1,000 yards rushing probably if he didn't miss any time? Blake Corum's been healthy the whole season. Jace was not. He missed time. Jace 200 yards behind him. Jace missed probably the equivalent of at least 3 games, in terms of just being either not healthy or not available. So Michigan's run game, sort of similar to Alabama's, where you have a running quarterback and a best back who's probably an 80-yard game type guy. It's just early in the season, McCarthy was incredibly efficient. I'm talking, he had 23 of 25, 16 of 20. I think he had another one was 20 of 24. He had a real bad game against Bowling Green. I mean, he threw 3 interceptions. I mean, and you're like, what? I don't know what happened to J.J. McCarthy that day. He must have been sick or something. He had a horrible day against Bowling Green. The other 4, he was highly efficient, putting up Heisman-level numbers and then throwing in 50 yards rushing. He's going to be difficult to defend. The offensive line gives you a good push push, especially in short yardage. And defensively, this is where they really are elite. They didn't give up much. They gave up 30 points in all of September. And yes, they were playing outmanned opponents. But you give up 30 points, not just in a month. They played 5 games in September, Luke. 30 points in their first 5 games. I don't care who you're playing. They can really play defense, and they got some dudes, not anybody, not Dallas Turner, not Kool-Aid, but man, they got some dudes on defense. And those first 5 games of the year, they were giving up nothing.
Yeah, they really weren't. And you know what? I'll tell you something though. I was just looking at some more Michigan rushing stats as you were talking about this, and their longest run is Blake Corum, 54 yards. The next longest run for anybody, and I really should take this out because it's a wide receiver who's only had 3 carries. Is Samaj Morgan. He had a 44-yard. So I'm really throwing that out. The next longest run for anybody on the team is 26 yards.
Yep.
That's
it sort of reminds you a little bit of Alabama. I mean, now Jalen Milroe is a kind of a difference maker there. I mean, Milroe is capable, as we all know, of running for an 80-yard touchdown. I mean, he can outrun DBs once he gets going. Jace McClellan has 2 80-yard touchdowns in his career. He just hadn't had anything like that this season. Maybe we can argue he's overdue. Maybe we can argue he hasn't been healthy in a while. So
now I think what we can argue about that is we've had enough sample size this season. That's not going to happen this season. He's due for an 80-yard run the way the Washington Generals are due to beat the Harlem Globetrotters.
Well, he's done it before.
He has. The Generals have beaten the Globetrotters before too.
One time. Yeah.
But what's interesting about that, so if you just look at running backs, right, and you say the longest run for a Michigan running back is 54 yards, the next longest is 26. Well, here's Alabama's. The longest run is 53 by Milroe. I'm throwing out the quarterback Ty Simpson one. I'm just throwing it out. Then you have a 48-yarder by Roydell. You have a 45-yarder by Jam. You have a 33-yarder by Justice Haynes and a 29-yarder by Jace McClellan. So they're sort of bunched up there a little bit more. Now, the only thing that stands out to me about this is our bell cow, who has 803 yards rushing. His longest run of the year is 29 yards. That does. There are a lot of bizarre rushing stats here to me.
He sounds plotting. When you put it like that, I think anyone would take, he's a plotter. He's really not. Yeah. I mean, Jace is probably at the combine, Luke. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to run a 4.4. I bet he runs in the 4.5s. I mean, Jace is not slow. It's just, I think, a product of, this is what it is. This is how I explain it. Early in the season when Jace was fresh and had good legs and wasn't hurt, Alabama's offensive line was struggling. By the time Alabama's offensive line turned it around, turned into one of the better offensive lines in the country, Jace was playing banged up or not at all. And I think that's what explains his lack of a big run. And now, perhaps he's healthy. Here's a good sign. Should have led with this because to me, it's almost the lead story of the day. Alabama assigns players to media availability, except for the Saturday thing when the media can meet with all the players. But until Saturday, they're assigned. Offensive players, I think, go Thursday and defensive players go Friday. I might have that backwards. My point being, Jace is one of the players assigned. And that's a great sign because I know how this works. Alabama is not going to make a player available to the media that won't be a significant player in the game. So to me, this is a subtle between the lines message that Jace is back and Jace is back playing a big role. Roydell is also meeting with the media. In the very first media availability, it's going to be Roydell, but Jace is also meeting with the media this week. So I think Jace is back and he's going to play.
Cool. That would be good. Jimmy, I just had a thought. This is apropos of nothing. People have really commented on my hair and your hair recently, and I've just realized your hair reminds me of the Sydney Opera House in Australia. And if people need to see an image of that, just Google it. Your hair
keeps getting bigger.
It is a natural canopy right now. You do not need an umbrella. It's
keeping me warm. It's keeping me warm because the weather's cool, and it is. No, it's coming off probably tomorrow, and ever since I've moved to Tuscaloosa, cutting my hair has been a thing. And I'm going to just go to, Will Reichard says go to Great Clips. So I may do that.
Okay, good idea. I think that's a start. When we come back, we are going to talk a little bit more about Michigan season because Jimmy has taken a dive into it. And we're back. Jimmy, you did a good article for On 3. Well, not an article necessarily. It was really just a post, wasn't it? That you just sort of threw up there. That was
my articles are in post form, partly because that's my duty, and partly because it's just so easy.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to edit quite as much, and if you just make a post, people forgive grammatical errors and things like that a little bit more.
Yeah. Oh, but I'm pretty careful with it. It looks like an article. It's just in post form, so people want to read my stuff. It's right there on the message board at BOL every day.
And just as a refresher, so Michigan's September schedule, and maybe a lot of people are like, what does this matter? September was a long time ago. Alabama played Texas in September, and they're two different teams. Now, I totally get it, but I think when you talk about the whole of September, you can begin to see, this team's personality and character taking shape. So Michigan beat East Carolina 30-3. They beat UNLV 35-7. They took care of Bowling Green 31-6, Rutgers 31-7, and dominated Nebraska 45-7. So Jimmy, you talked about all of those games in here, and again, they were all blowouts, and all against teams that did any of these teams go to
UNLV?
UNLV and Bowling Green, they just got waxed they just lost by 6 to Minnesota in the bowl game. So they played some bowl teams, but they weren't very good teams.
Yeah, when I had to debate, okay, who was the best team they played, UNLV or 5-7 Nebraska, or 5-7 Rutgers, I mean, who was the best team? So they played a ridiculously weak September. But if that's your only takeaway from it, you're missing the boat. I mean, they did what good teams do. They beat the crap out of these teams. Those games weren't necessarily close. They gave up nothing defensively. Again, 30 points the entire month. And, Alabama struggled against South Florida. Alabama didn't whip the non-conference teams they played. So I think what Michigan did was impressive in the month of September. It just needs to be taken with a grain of salt, as they say, because of the competition. But they were balanced offensively. They had a lot of success throwing it, particularly with their efficiency. And they ran the ball to where they dominated the time of possession in all those games. They sort of kept the ball. They didn't punt much. They would score 31 points, but only punt twice, because they weren't going 3 and out. I mean, they were keeping the ball, running the clock. I think it was kind of strange how the scores are so similar, regardless of opponent. They were beating everybody, basically 31-7, all of them. They did a little bit better than that on the road at Nebraska, which is impressive. But again, McCarthy, efficient. Talking about a couple of their players, I'll tell you what stood out to me. I watched a lot of clips from all 5 of those games, a lot. And the guy that stood out to me that I was unfamiliar with, or I should say, I had no idea was this good, Ramon Wilson, their top wide receiver. He is a good player. He reminds me of the Hunter Renfrow type, the Ladd McConkey type, where if you look at him physically, you're like, that guy can't be too much. But then what does he do? He gets open and he makes plays and he doesn't drop the ball and he scores touchdowns. He's a good player. I would even say, based on what I saw today, Luke, I would put him on a list of maybe top 5, top 7 receivers Alabama has seen all year long. We've seen some good ones between who you play when you play LSU and Georgia, Texas. Ramon Wilson's a good player. The tight end, Colston Lovelady, he is really good. Not quite Black. He's in the ballpark. He's in the ballpark. He's a real weapon. And again, McCarthy, super efficient, very accurate. From the clips I saw today, and of course I've seen McCarthy before, he's an NFL quarterback to me. I don't know that he'll ever be an NFL starter, but he's an NFL quarterback, very accurate. And there's not a trait you would rather have in a quarterback than accuracy. J.J. McCarthy, very accurate guy. Defensively, they don't make a lot of big plays, Luke. They don't sack you. They don't pick you off. They don't disrupt you with all these tackles for loss. What they do is they just give up nothing. You're just out there, then a minute later you're punting. I mean, they just don't give up yards or first downs.
And we say that, and at the same time, we know I don't think they've played an offense as dynamic as ours.
True.
I think
That's 100% true.
They've played better wide receivers. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably the best receiver. I mean, you could make an argument for elite neighbors, but I think Marvin Harrison probably the number one receiver taken off the board in the NFL draft.
The collection of quarterbacks they played all season long is appallingly bad.
Garbage.
I mean, I'm not sure who. I'll put it this way: when I did it earlier, right when the Michigan lineup was announced, and I listed all the quarterbacks Michigan's played, in my opinion, the best quarterback they played this year, and maybe it's not particularly close, was Talia Tagovailoa. He's the best they played, and Talia's a good player.
Yeah, he's a good player.
The best you played all year in your Michigan.
Are you surprised Talia's opting out of the bowl game? I am.
Yes, but I know why, and this is going to infuriate me if he's successful. And by the way, I'm a Talia Tagovailoa fan. I love the family, love what they did for Alabama. But Talia is going to attempt to gain another year of eligibility, even though he has no legal right to it. And I'm afraid of the challenge. I'm afraid that if a court eventually gets involved and rules that he can still play, are we going to evolve to a system, Luke, where you can play college football 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years as long as you're enrolled? That a court says, hey, if you're enrolled, we don't understand why your earning capacity, because now these guys are earning money.
Correct.
We don't understand why your earning capacity is being limited, and you can just keep on playing college football if you're enrolled. I hope Talia is not the guy that sets that precedent, because
God, that's a whole other show.
I know, but you asked about Talia and opting out. This is why Talia is trying to play a 6th year with the Miami Hurricanes. He's trying to do that.
God, that is so bizarre. I've used the term bizarre a lot in this podcast, by the way. Let me tell you something.
Can't blame Miami. I mean, I'm sure Miami's like, oh, this would be a good player. Yeah, but Talia doesn't have any eligibility left, even counting COVID. One of the reasons, though, is Alabama. Talia played in 5 games at Alabama, not 4. So he lost a year at Alabama because of that.
See, and that's kind of bunk, too. I think it'd be so nice. Again, what's going to happen is we're going to have 64, 68, 60, whatever teams get together and say, these are the rules we're going to have. You can play for 5 years, no red shirts, no medical red shirts. It's 5 years. That's what it is. You can make this much money. You can do this, and you're going to have contracts and whatever. That's what's going to end up happening, and it's going to change everything. And I don't know how Locked On Bama is going to handle it, but
we'll yell a lot.
I'll be too old.
We'll yell a lot from under this canopy of hair.
Let me tell you something else I thought about. And again, this has nothing to do with what we've discussed, but I think Alabama fans will at least find it interesting, and nobody has brought it up to my attention. So in 2015, Alabama needed, a borderline miracle play with Ole Miss against Arkansas. Hunter Henry throwing it backwards, Alex Collins catching it, running for the first down. They go into double overtime, and I think it was double overtime, and Arkansas ends up beating Ole Miss at home, coached by Hugh Freeze. Or Alabama might not be going to the playoffs. They might not. Ole Miss, I still think Ole Miss might have lost a game later because that's Ole Miss. But they, at the same time, theoretically, Alabama doesn't make it. Ole Miss probably goes to the SEC championship and yada, yada, yada. That Ole Miss team was coached by Hugh Freeze. Alabama this year needed a 4th and 31 at Auburn, Hugh Freeze at home, or they don't go to the playoffs. It is kind of weird that Hugh Freeze is involved in 2 incredible 4th down moments for Alabama to be able to play for a national championship, to be able to make the playoffs. Because without those 2 moments, Alabama probably doesn't make it, right?
Oh, that's absolutely true. That's an amazing connection. No, that's so true. It reminds me to say that, I've read a lot about how Alabama's fortunate to be there because of the Auburn game. Could not be more true. That's 100% true. But you know what? Michigan was 1 play away from losing to Maryland. 1 play.
100%.
And they would have lost to Maryland. Texas was 1 play away from losing to Texas Tech and Kansas State. Florida State, for all their complaining and going, look at Auburn. They only beat Boston College by 2 points.
Yep.
They were one play away from losing to Miami,
who
wasn't very good.
They were a bad Clemson kicker away from losing to Clemson at home, and it's not a good Clemson game this year.
And Clemson's 8-4 or 7-5 or something. I'm just telling you, winning close games by one play is a necessary step towards winning the national championship. I mean, I guess some people live in some fantasy world where the best team wins every game by 6 touchdowns. I've never seen that happen in the real world, but I guess people live in a fantasy world that if you're the championship team, you've crushed everybody. I don't know that Alabama. I remember in 1992, Alabama won the national championship. They beat Louisiana Tech, I think 13-7, 13-6.
It was 13-0. Was it 13-0 or 13-7?
Might have been 13-0 or 7-0. I mean, it was tight. It was Louisiana Tech.
It was 6-0 in the pouring rain in Legion Field, and I was there. And Deuce
Palmer returned a touchdown late.
Deuce returned a punt for a touchdown. We couldn't get anything going.
We also beat a bad Southern Miss team because we faked a punt in the second half and scored like 90 yards out, and that's why we beat Southern Miss, who had like 2 first downs the whole game. So I'm just saying, 2009, we had to block 2 field goals to beat a 7-5 Tennessee team. It is winning a close game by one play against even a mediocre opponent is basically something that's going to be found in the history of every championship team you look at. And if your idea of, no, you're not really a championship worthy team unless you crushed everybody you play. So there's been like 7 championship teams ever.
Yeah.
I mean,
and most of those are pre-World War II.
Our Army, during the war, when all of the boys in the U.S. all were at the Army.
All right, that's going to do it for today's podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Until then, hey, man, thank you guys for subscribing and watching and dealing with me during COVID and Jimmy's incredible hair and everything. We appreciate all of you guys. You guys are the best. We hope you had a Merry Christmas. Can't wait to carry this thing into the new year. I'm sure Locked On has some big plans. They don't let us know until later, but I'm sure they got big plans. And, man, I'm going to tell you, Jimmy, you're not going to Pasadena, right?
Not going to Pasadena. Plan to go to Houston, assuming Alabama wins in Pasadena, and I'm not making that assumption yet. But I am regretting my decision not to cut my hair as soon as we stop having thousands of listeners. That was a mistake.
That was a mistake. Yeah, I'm going to Houston too, but I'm not going to Pasadena. So what that means is we'll probably have a post-game reaction show, I'm hoping. After
Pasadena?
Pasadena
for sure.
All right, that's going to do it. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, roll tide, everybody.
Roll Tide.